They thought she was just a black cleaning lady, barely worth a glance. The bride humiliated her, yelling in front of everyone, "Who let the help sit here?" But what no one knew, this maid was actually the new owner, the quiet millionaire CEO who just bought the groom's $150 company. And before the night ended, she would stand, reveal everything, and the entire wedding party would be left frozen, speechless, jaws dropped in regret. Before we find out what happens next, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this story is already making your blood boil, hit that like button so more people see this. The ballroom of the Grand Oak Manor glittered with a blinding, almost aggressive opulence. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that fractured the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Champagne flowed from fountains, a constant bubbling stream of gold that filled the flutes of guests dressed in silks and tailored suits. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly cut peonies, a smell that screamed money. Laughter echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings, a performance of joy for the upcoming union of Victoria Hale and Ethan Cross. This was their rehearsal dinner, a showcase of wealth and status that was more of a coronation than a celebration of love. At a prominent table, reserved for the groom's closest family and business partners, sat a woman who did not seem to fit. Her name was Maya Jefferson. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, a stark contrast to the sequined and jewel-encrusted gowns around her. Her hair was styled neatly, her makeup minimal. She observed the room with a calm, steady gaze, her posture poised and her hands resting gently in her lap. She was a picture of quiet dignity, in a room full of loud declarations. It was this quietness, this seeming lack of place that drew Victoria Hale's eye. The bride, a vision in a white designer gown that probably cost more than a car, was holding court at the center of the room. Her laughter was the loudest, her smile the widest, a perfect performance for the photographers who fluttered around her like moths. Then she saw Maya. Her smile froze, replaced by a mask of cold disdain. A wrinkle appeared between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. She couldn't place the woman. She wasn't family, she wasn't a bridesmaid, she wasn't a C-list celebrity invited for press. Therefore, she could only be one thing. Without a moment of hesitation, Victoria began her march across the ballroom. The sea of guests parted for her as if she were royalty. Her designer heels clicked an angry rhythm on the polished marble floor. Her face was a storm cloud of indignation. She stopped directly in front of the table, her shadow falling over Maya. The laughter and chatter around them began to die down as people sensed the impending drama. "Excuse me," Victoria's voice was not a question. It was a command, sharp and brittle like shattering glass. It cut through the festive hum of the room. "Who let the help sit here?" A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. People turned, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hungry curiosity. This was better than the planned entertainment. Zach Hale, Victoria's brother, a young man with a permanent sneer etched onto his face, let out a loud snicker. "Looks like the maid who got lost," he called out, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Probably thought the good champagne was for everyone." Whispers erupted around the room. "Is she with the catering staff?" one woman murmured to her husband. "How embarrassing," another said, shaking her head and taking a delicate sip of her wine. The eyes of every guest in that section of the ballroom were now fixed on Maya, their gazes a heavy weight of judgment and morbid fascination. They saw her simple dress, her dark skin, and their minds filled in a story of a woman who had forgotten her station. Through it all, Maya remained impossibly calm. She did not flinch. She did not look away. Her eyes, deep and steady, stayed on Victoria. There was no fear in them, no shame. There was only a quiet, unnerving stillness that seemed to absorb all the chaos around her. Victoria, fueled by the attention, grew even bolder. The cruelty was a performance, and she was the star. She snapped her fingers, a sharp, ugly sound in the suddenly quiet room. She directed the gesture toward a young waiter named Jimmy, who was standing nearby, frozen with a tray of appetizers in his hand. "You," she barked, "escort the cleaning lady out. Now. I will not have my rehearsal dinner ruined by staff who don't know their place." Jimmy, a college kid just trying to make it through his shift, hesitated. His eyes darted from the furious bride to the calm woman at the table. Something felt profoundly wrong. The woman didn't look like she was lost. She looked like she belonged there more than anyone. His feet felt rooted to the floor. Across the room, another pair of eyes watched the scene with a tightening expression. Judge Carolyn Brooks, a respected federal judge and a distant family friend of the groom, felt a familiar knot of anger in her stomach. She recognized the casual cruelty, the arrogance disguised as a desire for perfection. She saw a powerful woman being reduced to a stereotype, and it made her blood run cold. She half rose from her seat, a silent protest forming on her lips. Victoria, enjoying her moment of power, smirked. In her mind, she had single-handedly restored the class and elegance of her perfect evening. She had put the world back in its proper order. Camera flashes went off, capturing the bride's triumphant sneer and the quiet woman who was the target of her scorn. Maya did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself against the accusations. She simply tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving Victoria's, and spoke. Her voice, low but carried with an incredible clarity in the tense silence. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The question hung in the air, simple and direct. It was not a plea. It was not a threat. It was something else entirely, something that pricked at the bubble of Victoria's self-righteous anger. For a fleeting second, a flicker of doubt crossed the bride's face, a momentary confusion. But it was quickly replaced by renewed fury. How dare the help question her? Victoria's chin shot up, her eyes narrowing into slits. She decided to double down, to make an example of this woman in front of all her guests, in front of the press. She projected her voice, making sure everyone within earshot could hear her pronouncement. "These events," she said slowly, condescendingly, as if speaking to a child, "are for family and invited guests, not for the staff. You need to learn to know your place." The words were a public branding, a deliberate act of humiliation designed to strip Maya of any shred of dignity. The guests murmured in agreement, nodding their heads. The social order had been affirmed. Ethan Cross, the groom, stood beside his bride, a pained expression on his face. He felt a deep, squirming discomfort in his gut. Something about the woman's unyielding calm, the quiet power in her eyes, felt terribly wrong. He knew Victoria could be difficult, but this level of public cruelty was unsettling. He opened his mouth to say something, to perhaps de-escalate, but then he caught Victoria's warning glare. He closed his mouth. Keeping the peace was easier. Linda Hale, Victoria's mother, a woman whose face was a permanent mask of snobbish disapproval, stepped forward. She waved a dismissive hand in Maya's direction, as if shooing away an insect. "Victoria is right," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Please, someone, remove her before the press sees. We can't have this sort of thing associated with our family." The word "thing" was aimed at Maya like a stone. The tension in the room thickened, becoming a palpable, suffocating force. All eyes were on Maya, waiting for her to break, to cry, to scurry away in shame. But she did none of those things. Instead, she rose from her chair. The movement was slow, deliberate, and graceful. She smoothed the front of her simple dress, a gesture not of nervousness, but of composure. There was no anger on her face, no trace of humiliation. There was only a profound, quiet power that radiated from her, an invisible shield that Victoria's insults could not penetrate. Judge Caroline Brooks, who had been watching intently, felt a strange sense of pride. She saw the strength Maya was displaying and made a decision. She would not intervene. Not yet. This was a lesson that needed to play out. She settled back into her chair, her mind sharp, her eyes missing nothing. She became a silent observer, a witness to the injustice. Maya turned to leave, her back straight, her head held high. But before she walked away, she did one last thing. She paused and locked eyes with Ethan. It was just for a moment, but in that gaze he saw not anger or sadness, but a deep and profound disappointment. It was a look that seemed to see right through him, to weigh his character and find it wanting. The look left him feeling hollow and deeply uneasy, a feeling he couldn't shake. As Maya walked away from the table and toward the ballroom exit, Victoria let out a triumphant little laugh. "See," she said to her bridesmaids, who gathered around her with fawning smiles. "Problem solved. Just another staff worker trying to feel important for a night." The guests, taking their cue from the bride, slowly returned to their conversations. The champagne started flowing again. The music swelled and the performance of celebration resumed. But the air in the grand ballroom felt different now. It was heavier, colder. A crack had appeared in the perfect, glittering facade of the evening. An unspoken question lingered in the minds of many, especially in Ethan's. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to take root. Something had shifted, and no one, least of all the bride, understood the monumental consequences of what had just happened. Just a few days earlier, the atmosphere was entirely different. Maya Jefferson stood not in a ballroom, but in a state-of-the-art boardroom on the 50th floor of a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The view of the city below was panoramic, a testament to power and influence. The air here was not filled with perfume, but with the crisp, clean scent of ambition. Maya was not wearing a simple dress. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, the lines sharp and commanding. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional style that highlighted her intelligent, focused eyes. She stood at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. Seated around it were some of the city's sharpest legal and financial minds, men and women in expensive suits, who watched her with a mixture of awe and deep respect. Before her, spread across the table, were stacks of documents, the culmination of months of intense secret negotiations. This was Maya Jefferson in her true element. This was the CEO, the strategist, the quiet force who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up. The people in this room knew her not as the help, but as one of the most brilliant and ruthless businesswomen of her generation. With a calm, steady hand, she picked up a heavy, expensive fountain pen. The only sound in the silent room was the soft scratch of the nib as she signed the final document. Her signature was a bold, confident stroke of black ink. With that single motion, the deal was done. Through her private holding firm, Jefferson Capital, she had just completed the outright acquisition of Crosstech, a rapidly growing technology company. The price tag, $150 million. The company's founder and, until a few moments ago, its owner, Ethan Cross. A lawyer in a pinstripe suit slid the document away, his movements precise and reverent. "Congratulations, Ms. Jefferson," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Crosstech is now entirely under your control." Maya gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. There was no triumphant smile, no fist pump, no outward display of victory. For her, this was not about emotion. It was about strategy. It was just another Tuesday. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, approached her with a tablet. "Ms. Jefferson," Sarah said quietly, "you received the invitation to the founder's wedding rehearsal. Will you be attending?" The lawyers and advisors exchanged curious glances. It was an unusual move for a new owner to attend a social event for the outgoing leadership, especially anonymously. Maya looked out the vast window, her eyes scanning the sprawling city below. "Yes," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I will. Book me a ticket. Just as a +1 for a distant family connection. I don't want any attention." Sarah looked puzzled. "May I ask why, ma'am? A formal introduction as the new owner would make a powerful statement." Maya turned away from the window, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. "A powerful statement is loud," she explained, her voice even and analytical. I prefer to gather information. The deal is signed. The company is mine. Now, I want to understand the character of the man I just went into business with. I want to see who Ethan Cross is when he thinks no one important is looking. The room was silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a business acquisition for Maya Jefferson. It was a character assessment. She was not just the new boss. She was the ultimate authority, holding the power to shape the future of the company and everyone in it. She had the full legal and financial right to fire anyone, from the newest intern to the founder and soon-to-be former CEO himself. The fate of Ethan Cross and the empire he had built now rested entirely in her hands, and she was about to judge him not on his balance sheets, but on his soul. Maya's decision to go undercover was not born from a desire for drama. It was a philosophy, a core principle that had guided her entire life. She had learned long ago that the world was quick to put people in boxes. From a young age, growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, she was labeled. She was told what she could and could not be. When she worked her way through college, taking cleaning jobs to pay her tuition, she was seen as the help. When she presented her first business plan to a room full of skeptical investors, she was seen as the diversity hire, a token gesture. Time and time again, people saw her skin color, her gender, her simple clothes, and they made up their minds about her before she ever spoke a word. She didn't fight these perceptions with anger. She used them. She learned that being underestimated was a superpower. When people dismissed her, they lowered their guard. They revealed their true selves, their biases, their weaknesses. And Maya, with her sharp, analytical mind, watched and learned. She saw the ugly truth of how people treated those they perceived as powerless. It was a better indicator of character than any resume or reference. This philosophy had been reinforced by her mentor, Judge Caroline Brooks. Years ago, when Maya was just starting her first company, she had sought the judge's counsel. Caroline, a woman who had shattered countless glass ceilings herself, saw the same fire and intelligence in Maya. "They will always try to put you in a box, Maya," the judge had told her over a cup of tea in her chambers. "They will look at you and see a maid, a secretary, anything but the person in charge. Do not let their blindness become your rage. Let it be your lens. Power is best revealed when they think you have none. True strength isn't about announcing your arrival. It's about changing the room without anyone knowing you've even entered." Those words became Maya's creed. So, when the opportunity arose to observe Ethan Cross and his new family in their natural habitat, she knew exactly what she had to do. This wasn't about catching them in a gotcha moment out of some petty desire for revenge. It was a calculated business decision. The culture of a company starts at the top. The character of its leadership infects everything. She needed to know if Ethan Cross was a man of integrity or if his success was built on a foundation of moral weakness. His character would determine the future of her $150 million investment. She arrived at the Grand Oak Manor early, long before most of the guests. She walked the grounds, not as a CEO, but as an anonymous observer. And she saw the small things, the tiny cuts of disrespect that revealed so much. She saw Linda Hale speak to a valet with a tone of voice usually reserved for a misbehaving dog. She saw Zach Hale mock a gardener who was struggling to move a heavy planter. She saw Victoria snap at a young waitress for bringing her the wrong brand of sparkling water, making the girl tear up. Each small act of cruelty was a data point. It confirmed her mission. These were people who believed their wealth and status gave them a license to be unkind, to treat others as less than human. They performed kindness for their peers, but their true character was revealed in how they treated the people serving them. By the time she took her seat at the reserved table, Maya already had a strong suspicion about the kind of people she was dealing with. Victoria's outburst wasn't a surprise. It was simply the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. It was the confirmation of everything she had come to find out. Back in the present, after being cast out of the grand ballroom, Maya found a quiet alcove in a long, richly decorated hallway. She stood by a large window looking out at the manicured gardens, her composure a stark contrast to the ugliness she had just endured. She took a slow, deep breath, not of anger, but of clarity. Everything was clear now. A soft voice broke her concentration. "Ma'am?" She turned to see Jimmy, the young waiter, standing there hesitantly. He was holding a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly. His face was pale, his eyes full of a sincere, youthful concern that touched Maya. He was clearly shaken by what he had witnessed. "I brought you some water," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He held out the glass. I'm really sorry about what she said, what they did. They shouldn't have done that." Maya's expression softened. She gave him a small, genuine smile, a gesture that seemed to instantly put the young man at ease. "Thank you, Jimmy," she said, her voice warm. She took the glass from him. "Your kindness means more than you know." Jimmy shuffled his feet, unsure of what to do next. He felt an urge to just walk away, to get back to his job and forget the whole thing. But he also felt a pull to stay, a sense of loyalty to this woman who had been so wronged. It's not right," he stammered. "The way they talk to people, to everyone." Maya took a sip of water and looked at him, her eyes seeming to see right into his character. "You're a good person, Jimmy," she said simply. He felt a blush creep up his neck. It was the first time anyone at this event had spoken to him like he was a human being. "Don't worry about me," Maya continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Just watch. People always show you who they truly are, especially when they think no one important is watching. They believe I'm no one, and because of that, they're about to show me everything." A spark of understanding lit up in Jimmy's eyes. He sensed that there was far more to this woman than met the eye. Her words resonated with him, with all the small slights and indignities he and the other staff members had endured that evening. In that moment, he made a choice. He was no longer just a passive observer. He was now an ally. "Okay," he whispered, a newfound resolve in his voice. He glanced down at his phone in his pocket. An idea began to form in his mind. Discreetly, he could capture moments, conversations. He could be a witness. Just then, another figure approached them down the quiet hallway. It was Judge Caroline Brooks. She gave Jimmy a nod of acknowledgement and then turned her attention to Maya. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stood beside Maya, a silent presence of solidarity. It was a powerful gesture, one that spoke volumes without a single word. The two women, two powerful figures in their own right, stood together against the backdrop of an ugly world, a quiet alliance forming in the shadows of the grand celebration. Maya knew she was not alone, and Jimmy, watching them, felt he was now part of something much bigger than a simple catering gig. Judge Caroline Brooks stood with Maya in the quiet hallway, the distant sounds of forced merriment echoing from the ballroom. The judge's mind, trained to analyze, to weigh evidence, and to see the long game, was racing. Her first instinct, the raw, human part of her, had been to storm back into that room and unleash a fury of righteous indignation upon Victoria Hale and her family. She had the status, the authority to silence them with a single stern sentence. She could have exposed Maya right then and there, revealing her as the new owner of Crosstech and watching the looks of horror dawn on their faces. But the judge in her, the strategic, patient part, held her back. She knew that an early reveal would be satisfying in the moment, a flash of sweet revenge. But it would be fleeting. It would rob the Hales of the opportunity to truly expose the depths of their own rotten character. It would ruin the lesson. A lesson, the judge believed, that they desperately needed to learn. A lesson that Maya was uniquely positioned to deliver. So, she chose restraint. She would not be the avenger. She would be the witness. A federal judge knows the power of a credible witness. She knows the importance of meticulously gathered evidence. She shifted her role from a passive guest to an active observer, her mind transforming the opulent ballroom into a courtroom of character. "They are fools, Maya," Carolyn said, her voice low and steady, her eyes fixed on the distant ballroom doors. "Pound foolish and soul bankrupt." "I know," Maya replied, her own voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil she must be feeling. "But the world is full of them. This is just a more concentrated sample." The judge turned to her, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "What is your plan?" "To let them think they've won," Maya said. "Arrogance makes people careless. I'm just going to give them more rope." Carolyn nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "Then I will be your witness," she declared. Her decision was made. She would not just watch, she would document. Her mind began to work, cataloging the events. She made a mental note of the exact words Victoria had used. "Who let the help sit here? Know your place." She noted Zach Hale's sneering comment about the maid. She recorded Linda Hale's dismissive wave, her dehumanizing language. She began to observe the other guests, categorizing their reactions. Those who laughed along with the Hales, their sycophantic cruelty noted. Those who looked away, their cowardly complicity registered. And those, like the young waiter Jimmy, who showed discomfort and compassion. Each reaction was a piece of testimony in the trial of the Hale family's character. She started making mental notes of names, faces, and snippets of conversation she overheard. She was no longer just a guest at a rehearsal dinner. She was a judge gathering evidence for a verdict that she knew with absolute certainty was coming. This was no longer just a social slight. In Caroline Brooks's mind, it was a case to be made, and she would ensure the prosecution had everything it needed. She was preparing for the moment the truth would explode, and she would be there to ensure the shrapnel hit its intended targets. Inside the ballroom, Victoria Hale was high on her own perceived victory. She felt powerful, righteous. She had successfully purged an unwanted element from her perfect party, and now she was reaping the social rewards. Surrounded by her giggling, adoring bridesmaids, she recounted the story with dramatic flair, embellishing the details to make herself sound even more commanding. "You should have seen her face," Victoria said, laughing as she mimicked a look of shock and fear that had never actually crossed Maya's features. "She just froze, like a deer in headlights. I put that little maid right in her place." Her friends erupted in sycophantic laughter. "You're amazing, Vicky," one of them gushed. "You're the only one brave enough to say what everyone is thinking." Zach, her brother, sidled up to the group, his phone held up to capture the moment. He was filming, a malicious grin on his face. "Tell them the best part," he prodded, enjoying the show. Victoria's smile turned cruel. She lowered her voice into a grotesque, mocking imitation of a southern accent, clearly aimed at some of the black kitchen staff she had encountered earlier. "Y'all need to be grateful you even get to be here," she mimicked, her friends howling with laughter. "Serving folks like us is an honor." It was a profoundly ugly moment, a display of unvarnished bigotry and classism. Linda Hale, their mother, joined the circle, a proud smile on her face. She added her own layer of venom to the conversation. "It's a matter of breeding, darling," she said, patting Victoria's arm. "People like that simply don't understand the rules. They need to be reminded, you did the right thing. You protected the integrity of this family." Their confidence was a toxic, bubbling poison. They felt untouchable, secure in their bubble of wealth and privilege. They believed their words were private, shared only among their trusted circle. They had no idea that just a few feet away, partially hidden by a large floral arrangement, Jimmy the waiter was standing perfectly still. He was pretending to wipe down an already clean serving station. His head was bowed, his posture subservient, making him effectively invisible to the gloating family. But his phone was in his breast pocket, the camera lens peeking out just enough. The red recording light was on. He captured everything. Victoria's bragging, Zach's instigation, Linda's smug approval, the cruel mockery of the staff's accents. He recorded their laughter, their sneering faces, their absolute certainty that they were superior beings. Every toxic word, every ugly sentiment was being saved, preserved as a digital piece of evidence. Jimmy's hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a potent mix of anger and adrenaline. Maya's words echoed in his head. They're about to show me everything. And they were. They were happily, ignorantly, building the case against themselves. Meanwhile, Ethan Cross stood on the other side of the room, swirling the amber liquid in his whiskey glass. He watched his fiancée and her family, a knot of deep unease tightening in his stomach. He had seen Maya walk out, her back ramrod straight, her dignity intact despite the public assault. And he had seen the look she gave him. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was a look of assessment, of evaluation. And he knew, instinctively, that he had failed the test. He remembered her eyes. There was something in them he couldn't place. It wasn't the look of a defeated maid. It was a look of quiet authority, of a deep, unshakable confidence that he had rarely seen, even in the most powerful venture capitalists he had pitched to. The memory of that gaze sent a shiver down his spine. His gut was screaming at him that something was terribly wrong, that Victoria had just made a colossal mistake. He should have said something. He should have stepped in, defended the woman, told Victoria to stop. It would have been the right thing to do. The decent thing to do. But he hadn't. He had stood by, a silent accomplice, all to keep the peace on the eve of his wedding. He had chosen the path of least resistance, placating his volatile fiancée at the expense of a stranger's dignity. Judge Caroline Brooks, from her vantage point, watched him. She saw the conflict on his face, the way he nervously adjusted his tie, the way he avoided looking at his own bride. She saw a man drowning in his own cowardice. Her disappointment in him was a cold, hard weight. There, she thought to herself, her mind a clinical dissecting instrument. There is the fatal flaw. She had known Ethan since he was a boy. He had always been brilliant, ambitious, a visionary in the tech world. But he had always lacked a spine. He avoided conflict, bent to stronger personalities, and prioritized his own comfort over moral conviction. A man who is about to run a $150 million company, she murmured to herself, her voice a low, contemptuous whisper, doesn't even have the backbone to correct his own bride when she's being a monster. She took a slow sip of her water, her eyes never leaving the groom. She knew that in the world of high-stakes business, moral weakness was a liability that could bankrupt a company faster than any market crash. Ethan's silence was not just a personal failing. It was a catastrophic business miscalculation. He was so focused on keeping the peace in his personal life that he was completely oblivious to the war he had just inadvertently declared on his professional one. He had no idea that his entire future, the company he had poured his life into, was being weighed in the balance by the very woman his bride had just cast out. His silence wasn't just golden, it was costing him everything. While the Hales celebrated their perceived social triumph and Ethan wrestled with his conscience, Maya Jefferson stood in the quiet, empty hallway, a world away from the noise of the party. The ugly scene had not shaken her resolve. It had solidified it. The data was collected. The assessment was complete. It was time to act. She pulled out her sleek, unassuming smartphone. With a few taps, she found the contact she needed. She pressed the call button and held the phone to her ear. It was answered on the first ring. "Sarah," she said, her voice completely calm, devoid of any anger or stress. It was the voice of a commander giving orders. "Is the team on standby?" The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "Yes, Miss Jefferson. We are ready and waiting for your signal." Maya glanced back down the hall toward the ballroom. The muffled sound of laughter reached her, a bitter reminder of the arrogance festering within. "I've seen enough," Maya stated simply. There was a finality in her tone that was absolute. "The character assessment is complete. It's worse than we anticipated." There was a brief pause on the other end, a moment of processing. Understood, ma'am. What are your orders? Maya's next words were delivered with a quiet, lethal precision. Everything is confirmed. Have the board members and the legal team at the Grand Oak Manor at 7 p.m. sharp. Use the private entrance to the West Wing, book the presidential suite for the meeting, and bring the contracts. She paused, adding a crucial detail. The employment contracts and the termination clauses. Right away, Ms. Jefferson, Sarah replied, her voice a flurry of efficient energy. There was a sound of typing in the background. Anything else? Yes, Maya said. Alert the on-site event manager that we will require the presence of Mr. Ethan Cross and the Hale family for an urgent and non-negotiable meeting concerning the future of Crosstech. Sarah's voice held a note of clarification. As the new owner, everything will be done exactly as you have ordered. We will handle all the logistics. Good, Maya said. I'll see them at 7. She ended the call. The trap was set. The pieces were moving. She slid the phone back into her purse, her expression unreadable. She was no longer just an observer. The judge had gathered her evidence. Now the executioner was ready to deliver the sentence. The party was almost over. At precisely 6:45 p.m., just as the main course was being cleared, a man in a dark suit, the hotel's senior event manager, approached the head table. He moved with an air of quiet urgency that immediately cut through the festive chatter. He leaned down and spoke directly to Linda Hale, who he presumed was the matriarch in charge. Mrs. Hale, he began, his voice low but firm. I apologize for the interruption. We have just been informed that a surprise board meeting has been scheduled for 7 p.m. here at the manor. Victoria, who overheard, let out an annoyed sigh. A board meeting? Now. Who would schedule a meeting during our rehearsal dinner? That's incredibly rude. Tell them to reschedule. The manager's expression did not change. He held his ground, a testament to his training in dealing with difficult, wealthy clients. I'm afraid that's not possible, ma'am. My instructions are that the meeting is mandatory for Mr. Cross and his immediate family. It concerns the future of his company. The phrase, future of his company, sent a jolt of anxiety through Ethan. His face, already pale from his earlier discomfort, lost another shade of color. A board meeting? He repeated, his voice tight with confusion. I didn't schedule any meeting. I'm the CEO. I would know. He looked around at his business partners at the table, but they all shrugged, their faces blank with confusion. Victoria was more annoyed than concerned. She saw it as an intrusion on her perfect night. This is ridiculous, Ethan. Tell them to go away. Tonight is about us. But Linda Hale, ever the opportunist, was intrigued. A surprise meeting with the board? It sounded important. It sounded like money. Perhaps it was a surprise bonus announcement or some other lucrative news related to the acquisition. Now, Victoria, she said, placing a calming hand on her daughter's arm. Let's not be hasty. If the board is here, it must be important. We should hear what they have to say. She envisioned a dramatic announcement that would only add to the prestige of the evening. Zach just looked bored. Can we make it quick? The open bar isn't going to drink itself. A sense of panic began to rise in Ethan. This was outside of his control. A meeting he didn't call, about the company he thought he still ran. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Judge Carolyn Brooks, who had been observing the exchange from a nearby table, quietly stood up. She had been waiting for a signal, and this was it. As the Hales and a bewildered Ethan were led from the ballroom by the manager, the judge followed at a discreet distance. Her role as a passive witness was over. Now she would be present for the verdict. She walked behind them down the long carpeted hallway, her steps silent and measured, the quiet footfalls of justice approaching. The family was led towards the west wing of the manor, an exclusive area they hadn't seen before. As they rounded a corner, they saw them. Lined up in the grand circular driveway were 5 identical black sedans, their tinted windows gleaming under the evening lights. The cars were sleek, expensive, and imposing. They exuded a silent corporate power that was a world away from the festive chaos of the wedding party. As the Hales watched, the car doors opened in near-perfect unison. Men and women in dark, impeccably tailored business suits stepped out. Their faces were serious, their expressions unreadable. Ethan's blood ran cold. He recognized them. These weren't just any executives. This was the senior legal counsel from the firm that brokered the acquisition, several high-level board members from Jefferson Capital's holding company, and a handful of financial analysts whose reputations were legendary on Wall Street. These were the sharks, the closers, the people who operated in a stratosphere of power far above his own. They walked in a silent, formidable procession toward the entrance of the West Wing. They moved with a shared purpose, a phalanx of corporate authority. As they passed the Hale family, who were standing awkwardly on the steps, they didn't even grant them a passing glance. It was as if they were invisible, insignificant. Victoria, deeply offended by the slight, stepped forward. Her ego could not handle being ignored. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "I am Victoria Hale, the bride. What is going on here? Who are you?" A stern-looking woman with silver hair, the lead counsel for Jefferson Capital, paused for a fraction of a second. She turned her head slightly, her eyes sweeping over Victoria with a look of utter disinterest before she continued walking without breaking stride. No one answered. The silent dismissal was more insulting than any retort. Ethan felt a wave of nausea. These people were not here to celebrate him. They were not here to offer congratulations. Their presence felt like an omen, a gathering of storm clouds before a hurricane. The color drained completely from his face as a terrifying thought began to creep into his mind. I am not in control. I am not in control of any of this. Victoria was still fuming, demanding answers from the unmoving hotel staff, but Ethan was frozen, watching the parade of power disappear into the building. He felt like a man who had just realized he was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The small, bewildered group was escorted into a private hall within the presidential suite. The room was intimidating. It was dominated by a massive dark wood conference table that could have seated 30. The air was cool and smelled of leather and old money. The executives and lawyers who had arrived in the black cars were already seated, their briefcases open, documents neatly arranged in front of them. They looked up as the family entered, their collective gaze cold and analytical. At the head of the long table sat a single large high-backed leather chair. It was empty. It was clearly the seat of power, the throne in this corporate courtroom. Victoria, ever the narcissist and still clinging to the belief that this was all somehow about her, saw the empty chair as her rightful place. After all, she was the bride, the queen of this event. She smoothed her gown, and with an air of unearned authority, made a direct line for the head of the table. She was about to sit down to claim the seat of power for herself. "I wouldn't do that, ma'am." The voice was calm, but carried an unbreakable tone of command. It came from the lead counsel, the silver-haired woman. She hadn't even looked up from her papers. Victoria stopped, her hand hovering over the back of the chair. "Excuse me? This is my wedding weekend. I think I can sit where I please." The lawyer finally lifted her head, her eyes like chips of ice. "That seat," she said, her voice cutting through Victoria's entitlement, "is reserved." Linda Hale stepped forward. "Reserved for whom? For the chairman? Is he here?" "It is reserved for the new owner," the lawyer stated flatly. A wave of confusion washed over the room. The Hales looked at each other, then at Ethan. Ethan just shook his head, his face a mask of bewildered panic. "The new owner?" he stammered. "But the deal was with a holding firm. It was anonymous. I haven't met them." The executives around the table remained silent, their faces impassive. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a tightening pressure that made it hard to breathe. Everyone looked around, at the doors, at each other, wondering who this mysterious, powerful new owner could possibly be. And then the double doors at the far end of the hall opened. A figure stepped through. The silence in the room crashed down, absolute and deafening. It was Maya Jefferson. But it was not the Maya from the ballroom. The simple navy dress was gone. In its place was a sharp, black executive pantsuit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was styled in an elegant professional updo. She wore a pair of glasses that framed her intelligent, determined eyes. She walked into the room not with the hesitation of the help, but with the confident, measured stride of a person who owned every molecule of air in it. She carried a leather portfolio under her arm. Jaws literally dropped. Victoria's perfectly painted mouth fell open. A silent gasp lodged in her throat. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a marble statue. Linda Hale clutched at her pearls, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Zach's mocking sneer vanished, replaced by a look of slack-jawed shock. And Ethan? Ethan looked as if he had been punched in the stomach. He stumbled back a step, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The woman from the table. The cleaning lady. The person they had humiliated and discarded. Maya walked to the head of the table. She did not look at the stunned family. She exuded an aura of such immense power and authority that no one dared to speak. She reached the empty chair, the seat of power, and stood behind it, placing her portfolio on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The room held its breath. Maya finally raised her eyes and let her gaze sweep across the frozen, horrified faces of the Hale family. She looked at Ethan, whose face was a mess of confusion and regret. She looked at Victoria, who was now trembling, her world tilting off its axis. She stood at the head of the table, a silent commander surveying her new territory. The quiet woman they had tried to break was now in a position to break them completely. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until Maya decided it was time for it to end. "Good evening," she began, her voice the same calm, steady tone she had used all night. Yet in this context, it was terrifying. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. She looked directly at Ethan, then let her gaze drift over to Victoria and her horrified family. "For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting formally," she said, a hint of ice in her voice, "my name is Maya Jefferson. I am the founder and sole proprietor of Jefferson Capital." She paused, letting the name sink in. It was a name that carried immense weight in the financial world, a name synonymous with power and success. Then she delivered the final, devastating blow. "And as of yesterday afternoon, I am the new and sole owner of Crosstech. I own the company, its assets, its patents, and its personnel, entirely." The words landed like physical impacts. Ethan visibly collapsed into a nearby chair, his legs giving out from under him. He stared at Maya, his mind reeling, trying to connect the dots between the woman Victoria had called the Help and the legendary, almost mythical figure of Maya Jefferson. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. Victoria turned a shade of pale that was almost translucent. Her mind flashed back to her own words. "Who let the Help sit here?" "Know your place." A wave of nausea so profound washed over her that she had to grip the back of a chair to keep from falling. Linda Hale let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Her face, usually a mask of haughty superiority, was now a canvas of pure, unadulterated terror. The world she knew, a world built on a strict hierarchy of wealth and status, had just been turned completely upside down. The lead lawyer, at a nod from Maya, spoke up, her voice formal and official. "We can confirm," she said, addressing the room, "that Ms. Jefferson's holding company completed the $150 million acquisition yesterday. She holds 100% of the voting shares. Her authority is absolute." Maya let the confirmation settle in the suffocating silence. Then she looked toward the door. "Jimmy," she called out. Jimmy, the young waiter, stepped into the room. He was no longer wearing his waiter's uniform. He was dressed in a simple but neat button-down shirt and slacks. He held his phone in his hand, his expression nervous but resolute. He walked over to Maya and handed her the phone. Maya took the phone and tapped the screen. She turned it so the speaker faced the room. "Earlier this evening," she said, her voice cold as steel, "I was treated to a rather candid display of this family's character. I believe it's important for the board and for Mr. Cross to understand the culture he has fostered." She pressed play. Victoria's voice, loud and mocking, filled the silent boardroom. "You should have seen her face. I put that little maid right in her place." The sycophantic laughter of her bridesmaids echoed eerily. Then came her cruel imitation of the staff. Then Linda's voice dripping with condescension. "People like that simply don't understand the rules. They need to be reminded." The room was frozen. The Hales looked as if they had been turned to stone. They were being forced to listen to their own ugliness, their own hatred played back for this room of powerful strangers. The recording was a mirror, and the reflection it showed was monstrous. When the recording finished, a profound and terrible silence fell upon the room once more. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Their own words had become their cage. Maya switched off the phone and placed it on the table. She fixed her gaze on Victoria, a gaze that was not angry, but was filled with a deep, chilling disappointment. It was the look of a judge about to deliver a final, unappealable sentence. "You told me," Maya said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an avalanche, "to know my place." She gestured with an open hand to the room, to the powerful people seated at the table, to the chair she stood behind. "Here it is." Victoria flinched as if she had been struck. Tears began to well in her eyes, not of remorse, but of pure, selfish terror. Her perfect life, her perfect wedding, her perfect future as the wife of a tech mogul were all evaporating before her very eyes. Maya's gaze shifted from Victoria to the lead lawyer. "The charitable partnerships and community outreach programs," Maya said, her voice now crisp and all business. "They were to be managed by Mrs. Hale and her daughter, correct?" The lawyer consulted a file. "That was the preliminary plan, yes. A board seat on the foundation for Mrs. Hale, and a salaried director of community engagement role for the future Mrs. Cross." "That plan is cancelled," Maya declared, her words swift and final. "Effective immediately. Victoria Hale is to have no association, formal or informal, with this company or any of its philanthropic arms. Her name is to be removed from all documents. The same applies to her mother, Linda Hale. She is to be banned from all corporate properties and events. Security is to be given their photos." Linda let out a wounded cry. The social status she had craved, the prestige of being on a corporate foundation board, was snatched away in an instant. Victoria just stood there, weeping silently, the reality of her consequences crashing down on her. Then Maya turned her attention to Ethan. He looked up at her, his face a portrait of utter devastation and regret. He knew what was coming. "And you, Mr. Cross?" Maya said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its authority. "Your silence tonight was illuminating. It spoke volumes about your leadership, about your backbone." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but Maya held up a hand, silencing him. "You built an impressive company," she acknowledged. "Your technical skills are undeniable, but your character is a liability. Therefore, you will not be continuing as CEO. The board and I have decided to put you on a 6-month probationary period. You will report to the new Chief Operating Officer, who I will appoint next week. You will be a consultant. Your job will be to ensure a smooth transition. After 6 months, we will evaluate your position. Whether you have a future with the company you created will depend entirely on your conduct from this moment forward." It was a stunning demotion. He was no longer the king of his own castle. He was an employee on thin ice. Finally, Maya looked at Jimmy, who was standing nervously by the door. A genuine smile touched her lips. Jimmy, she said, her voice warm for the first time. Your integrity in a moment of pressure was noted, as was your quick thinking. My executive assistant is retiring next month. The position is yours, if you want it. Jimmy's jaw dropped. He stared at her, speechless. Executive assistant to Maya Jefferson? It was a life-changing opportunity, a quantum leap from his life as a struggling student waiter. He could only nod, his eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. Judge Caroline Brooks, who had been standing silently in the corner of the room the entire time, allowed a small, satisfied smile to grace her lips. She gave a single, sharp nod of approval. Justice had not only been served, it had been delivered with surgical precision. The aftermath was a quiet implosion. The wedding, for all intents and purposes, was ruined. News of the dramatic confrontation in the West Wing spread through the remaining guests like wildfire. The atmosphere of celebration curdled into one of awkward whispers and sideways glances. The Hale family, stripped of their power and publicly shamed, became social pariahs in an instant. Some guests, realizing the magnitude of who Maya was, approached her with hasty, fawning apologies, trying to distance themselves from the Hales' catastrophic misjudgment. Maya accepted none of them. She simply gave them a cool, dismissive nod, and, with her new executive team and Judge Brooks at her side, she exited the manor. She walked out with the same quiet dignity with which she had entered, leaving the wreckage of the Hale family's arrogance behind her. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to see but the ruins of a life built on a foundation of cruelty and entitlement. The Grand Oak Manor, once a symbol of their social peak, had become the monument to their fall. The world loves to decide who you are before knowing your story. It will look at your clothes, your skin, your job, and write a narrative for you. It will put you in a box labeled important or unimportant. But real power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need fancy titles or expensive clothes to be validated. Real power stays silent. It watches. It learns. It understands that a person's true character is revealed not in how they treat their equals, but in how they treat those they believe are beneath them. And when that real power finally speaks, it doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to argue. It simply states the truth. And that truth, when spoken, ends arguments. It ends careers. It ends everything. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.